Enotria The Last Song was never a game I fully had on my radar. Its most notable cultural moment was when the Shadow of the Erdtree's release date was revealed to be the same date that this indie Souls-likes had been, which forced the devs to delay their game as they admitted it would be a suicidal move for their game. This is a pretty charismatic moment, and a smart decision on the developer's part, which essentially shows them bending the knee to the kings of the industry. And I don't think they have hard feelings about it, considering they've delayed it even further past that point, now expecting it to release in September. I never planned on playing this demo, and to be honest, was unaware that it had released until a comment on my last video mentioned it. Thank you for the recommendation, by the way. After looking it up and realizing that it was a Steam and PlayStation exclusive, I was also a bit dissuaded from trying it out, with Xbox being my home console. The developers previously have stated that they wish the game could be released on all platforms, but they would rather have a functioning game on fewer systems rather than a shit one on all of them. Again, this is a smart and mature move on their part, something that the Lords of the Fallen devs should learn from, if there's any left of them. I've seen news articles multiple times detailing many layoffs in their company, and that's pretty sad. People shouldn't lose their jobs just because leads on shitty projects can't get their shit together. Enotria, on the other hand, seems to function pretty well, as I only had one moment where it glitched out, where the items I collected weren't showing up on screen. I attempted to quit to the main menu to reload and the game crashed, but this only affected my gameplay in a minor way. After reloading, the glitch went away and I continued the game without issue. Well, that is without technical issues. I've played this demo twice now, once to see if it'd be worth making a video on, in which I accidentally spent all my resources across like 12 different weapons, and ended on the final boss with no real build, shit damage, and no way to course correct at that point. And so I loaded up again and began the demo again while recording this run, and this time deciding to only spend my resources on the initial starting sword. The weapons in Enotria exist in a really nebulous place, being that they don't have the Souls standard strike, pierce, and standard damage types, instead having a basic physical damage and potentially a secondary status effect build-up stat. They also don't feature unique Ashes of War or skills, which have similarly been standardized in Souls. And so the only difference between them is the damage they deal, the speed at which they swing, and the amount of unraveling damage they do, which is a stand-in for Sekiro's posture bar. This is a real problem when, much like Lords of the Fallen, the game boasts a huge amount of weapons, none of which feel all that different from one another. And so most of those assets were wasted in development, and that time should have been spent elsewhere. This game doesn't really know what it wants to be, being that its combat is very Sekiro-like, prioritizing parrying but also giving a generous dodge, which leaves neither as a fully rewarding style of combat. The weapons could just have easily been removed entirely and subbed in for the more easily balanced single weapon style of game such as Sekiro or Another Crab's Treasure, the latter of which offers stowaways that when equipped give you either more damage and slower attack speed or less damage and faster attack speed, which is essentially what we're given in Enotria. But instead of being simple to design and charmingly high functioning, Enotria's weapons just feel hollow. You're given so many variants of a basic straight sword in this demo alone, with the most simple and underwhelming changes between them. And so for this run, I decided to treat this game like a Sekiro-like, and stick to the sword you're given in the intro, which has one of the faster swing speeds, which acts as a placebo for the incredibly slow-paced combat that you'll experience throughout this demo. I had previously mained a colossal greatsword in my first run, and the regular light attack on that weapon was so unbelievably slow that the only way I was able to deal damage on openings was to utilize jump attacks, which increased the unravel damage. It's stagger damage. Just stagger damage. This was enough to flinch the boss out of their next attack, but also drained my stamina bar. And so the combat was reduced to dodge an attack, then jump attack, at which point me and the boss would stare at each other for a few seconds while we recovered and then repeat the process. Now, other than the guaranteed flinch I got with the Mega Greatsword, the utility of the jump attacks feel pretty nebulous as well. I will say that the final boss of the demo features a jumpable move, which is more than I expected, and feels pretty good, and I sure hope they play a lot more with the mechanic in the full release. However, outside of this one interaction, the jumping doesn't feel all that natural and doesn't flow with the combat all that well. With the starting sword, I never found it worth jump attacking rather than just light attack spamming on any point outside of the final boss's move. Again, this game is trying to be Sekiro, trying to be an RPG with a huge amount of weapons, trying to be Italian, but no one aspect of its design is all that fleshed out, and none of them interact in fluid ways. Sure, jumping is a mechanic on some moves, but I can't see this game featuring a jumping build with a weapon that deals increased jump damage and skills related to this, because the weapon and the skills are half-assed. And one thing these developers should have certainly learned from Elden Ring, the game they acknowledge they cannot compete with and therefore should have studied intently while developing, is that Elden Ring's button layout features its jump attack on the A or X button on PlayStation, which it absolutely doesn't share with the interact button. Lords of the fucking Fallen had the same exact issue, and it's embarrassing to see this title fall into so many of the same criticisms that I had with that turd. You will constantly see me jumping around for no reason within the footage I have here, and this is on my second run through where I have a decent amount of practice with the controls. It is so obnoxious to be mid-boss fight attempting to gather your souls, which are apparently called memoria, but they're just ambiguous currency, and you miss the prompt to retrieve and then jump into the air like an asshole, which prevents you from dodging the boss's incoming attack. These kind of mechanics have to be implemented with care, such as Sekiro did when it introduced jump attacks and changed the interact button to X or square. Jamming every concept from every Souls game into your project without considering what it brings to the table and how you're going to execute it is just irresponsible. Like I said earlier, people's jobs are on the line when developing video games, and the leads on these projects are responsible for the outcome when they manage a sloppy project, which I believe this to be. This game lacks focus in some pretty severe aspects, from even the basic aesthetic of the game, to the confused combat, to the implementation of masks, skills, loadouts, the parallel realm mechanic, and the special attacks. The title being The Last Song doesn't seem to have any meaning from the world building in the demo, and the reoccurring concepts of memory and strings leaves a wholly too ambiguous taste in my mouth. There's no personality behind the design of bonfires, unraveling damage, the golden rune mechanic, memoria, the mask lines, all being related to string. The intro cinematic of a flower falling onto a doll, I guess, doesn't inspire me to look deeper to find meaning, because it's all just nebulous metaphor that lacks a through line as far as I can tell. The mask mechanic simply gives you a single bonus that a Dark Souls ring might give you, and a pointless expensive upgrade to these masks is available, but only once. And the loadouts that you might take advantage of are changeable on the fly with the press of down on the D-pad, but this function is really slow and awkward. Pressing down on the D-pad will change your loadout to the next of 3, but you don't get to cycle through it to get to the right one, you just flip to the next, unless you mash it and then it skips one, but that also might be a glitch. It feels as though you're meant to press it once, which after a delay will change, and this awkward half-menu system reminds me of changing the input on a television. The annoying, unresponsive nature of the system had me ignoring it entirely, and makes me wonder why it was placed on the D-pad instead of inside the menus, which would have freed up the D-pad input to use your healing flasks such as Sekiro, which also would have freed up the triangle as the interact button like in Elden Ring. Within the loadout, you're also given access to slot different skills you might have purchased within your skill tree. I find it odd that a skill tree wouldn't automatically unlock the skill for you, just like every other game in existence, but you'll have to slot them into your loadout's 6 slots, which I didn't find out until my second run of the demo. Slotting something within your mask feels like it should be a physical item purchased from a shop or found, rather than a skill chosen from a skill tree, which is another reason this game feels so confused and unimmersive. Enotria also features a mechanic disturbingly similar to the umbral dual worlds mechanic of Lords of the Fallen, which you'll activate on these nodes. They either give you structure that allows you to traverse obstacles or spawn enemies for you to fight, and if you leave the area, the parallel world collapses. I don't know what this mechanic is trying to facilitate. If you leave the area, then you're clearly not attempting to utilize the platforms, and therefore they don't need to exist. And while you're using them, you're clearly not going to leave the area. It's like the implication of something interesting is happening, but there's no reason for the mechanic to exist. It doesn't offer any kind of substantive gameplay, at least in the travel version of it. The enemy version pits you against enemies that previously didn't exist, but also sometimes opens doorways that were previously closed, but also sometimes does nothing as far as I could tell. I don't really feel the need to kill 2 archers on a slim platform with a deadly fall below me for no reason. It could also be that an item dropped but it didn't show up because of the glitch, but I'm not sure. And it could also be that completing these challenges awards the other ambiguous currency that you spend on your skills. And again, this just all feels so hollow. The last facet of the sandbox of this demo is the special attacks, that I think are just called lines. It's all so exhausting. I'm not obliged to care about this crap. It's supposed to have substance which makes me want to care. Instead, it's all just string-related nonsense that barely functions. These skills require you to charge them up by hitting enemies, similar to the Fable slots in Lies of P. They charge at different rates, and I believe the rate can be affected by leveling up a specific skill, which I dropped to 0 by applying another version of a skill or perk that's slottable within a single slot on your mask. These, whatever they're called, will increase your stats slightly or increase them greatly while decreasing others. One of which drops from the first real boss and increases basic damage stats while dropping your special magic skill stats. By the final fight of the demo, I had realized that I wasn't getting a single skill charged up before even reaching phase 2, so I ignored them for the most part. I never even used the harpoon skill that I had upgraded to max with its single upgrade tier, just like the mask have. These special attacks may have an endgame utility, but they're not even remotely as valuable as similar mechanics in other titles. In theory, you would want these abilities to act as powerful bursts of damage or utility to help you get through a difficult spot or overcome an annoying challenge. Lies of P's Legion Arm or Elden Ring's Ashes of War are good examples of this. Enotria's lines are utterly underwhelming as far as I could tell within this demo. They never once offered enough utility to be better than light attack spamming. And that's not even mentioning that the charge of these skills is removed when you die or when you rest at a bonfire, which makes them only available to you after you've been fighting for a considerable amount of time. At that point, it's generally unwise to shift your focus from the combat with the boss in an attempt to utilize a skill that you're likely unfamiliar with, because you've probably only used it once in a safe situation after killing some basic enemies. You won't be familiar with the timing of the attack, leaving you unaware of whether or not the boss's opening leaves enough time to perform it. And so, they're basically useless at this point in the game without a large amount of resource investment, which you could be spending on your main weapon's basic damage. And that's just to facilitate an ability that can only be utilized after charging it by dealing damage with your basic weapon. Yet again, another hollow mechanic that offers very little to the combat of the game, which makes a total of the weapons, the masks, all the stats related to anything other than damage, the skills, the lines, and every resource related to their upgrades, completely unrelated to the actual combat of the game. Each of these facilitate damage in one way or another, and high damage or not, the boss fights should be able to stand on their own, which they do not in this demo. The combat in Enotria is very similar to the basic garbage combat in Lords of the Fallen, except that the parry is slightly better, and bosses don't lose track of you and have to re-engage after you dodge behind them once. Real quick, another aspect of your build, which I had forgotten because of how basic it is the parry stone. You're given one that blocks all damage on a perfect parry from the start, and the only other one I found would only block some of the damage but gave more resistance to magic or something. It was completely useless, and I don't know how the mechanic will play out on the full release. If you want me to switch away from the starting perfect parry stone, then you'll have to give me something that does a perfect parry and more, not less. Anyway, the boss fight combat seems to be the standard affair of either dodge or parry attacks while attacking on openings until building the posture bar enough for a critical attack. This first real boss is a serviceable enough boss fight, except for the fact that his phase 1 moveset is the exact same as some of the enemies you'll have fought just before his arena. It's a really underwhelming thing to walk into a boss arena, see an enemy perform a unique animation, to have a unique model and a unique name, only to reuse the whole moveset of a disappointing enemy I had just beaten. It's certainly a red flag to me just how much of this demo walks in the incompetence of Lords of the Fallen's footsteps, and it's especially worrisome to think that this was supposed to be the content that draws you into the game. This is supposed to sell us on the concept, and instead it throws 100 underdeveloped concepts at you before copy and pasting on the boss, because there just wasn't any time to develop something unique. They spent all their efforts on pointlessly padding the roster of paper-thin weapons and implementing 3 different systems of skills and perks. It's a really bad sign if you ask me, and it's especially poignant after playing another Crab's Treasure, which wasn't trying to be the biggest Souls-like ever, with a million mechanics. It instead focused on the fundamentals and became one of the better Souls-likes in the industry. It knew what it was, and it executed that with excellence. This game wants to be everything and doesn't have the steam to accomplish anything of note. I don't even really want to go into detail on the boss's moveset because it's absolutely nothing we haven't seen before. At best, it functions, and at worst, it's embarrassing, such as in the fake out move, which reels his weapon to the left and then switches sides and readies an attack from the right. Nobody would fight like that, and it just ends up looking stupid. There are far better ways to implement a feint attack. His Phase 2 picks up the pace and introduces many thrusting moves, which Phase 1 lacked because it was supposed to be a universal moveset that other enemies could use while brandishing other weapons such as a Morning Star. Phase 2 often feels very cheap, hiding telegraphs to quickly hit you or using tracking thrusts. Thrusts should never be used as a way of guaranteeing a hit on the player if they fail to time a dodge. That's what AoEs or sweeps are for. Thrusts are supposed to be strong in their reach, catching you off guard when you think you're safe and outside of the boss's range. They should be weakest when lateral movement is employed and strongest against forwards or backwards movement. This is basic shit that only the oldest and most archaic Souls games failed to recognize in their combat. It's embarrassing to see a successful dodge that results in the spear clipping through my face after its damage hitbox is ended. And it's equally embarrassing for the boss to slide around while tracking you just to perform the cheap, undeserved hit on you. And don't get me wrong, I misdodged the attack, therefore I deserve to be hit. But if you can't design a boss that uses moves appropriate to hit me in that scenario, then you don't deserve to be the one that hits me. It's a lose-lose situation where I'm frustrated at myself for being hit, but also frustrated to be hit by a pathetic moveset design. And that will become far more apparent in the final boss of the demo. The last thing I have to say about this boss is his utter lack of character, which is implied but never realized. He's called the Prince of Laughter and wears a jester's mask, while cackling pathetic psychopathic quips at you which absolutely doesn't land. Maybe I'm being extra hard on this game in that I just came off of Crab Souls, which had excellent character design, but this complete lack of substance makes me wonder why they even bothered at all. He's a copy-paste of the enemy just outside of his arena who also has jester qualities to his design. What about this asshole makes him the Prince of Laughter? And trust me, I know a thing or two about being an unfunny, uncharismatic jester. Moving on from this fight will bring you to this desolate, witch-filled demon zone, and I have to wonder, was that as far as the aesthetic concept of Italian Souls could bring us? This game is marketed as a Souls game taking place in a sunny Italian-inspired world. To quote their own description, Enotria, the last song, is a thrilling soulslike. Soulslike. They fucked up the spelling on their Steam page. Okay, let's try that again. Enotria, the last song, is a thrilling soulslike set in a sunlit land inspired by Italian folklore and filled with danger. Yeah, this area looks really sunny and Italian, alright. And that's not to say that Italy was even a remotely good premise to create a Souls game in the first place. Best case scenario, it's Lies of P without the P. So just lies. And I'm not saying that just to shit on Italians, but who the fuck would want any Souls games inspired by just a country? A cloudy Chechnyan Souls-like. A chilly Canadian Souls-like. I'd give another example, but I don't know any more countries. My point is that it's fucking nothing. It doesn't mean anything and has no substance. If you wanted to make Italy interesting, you would have to add a puppet. And a blue-haired bad bitch firekeeper. This game doesn't even have a bad bitch firekeeper. What the fuck are they doing with their lives? This whole section of the game is pretty tedious, but there is a pretty cool bit of level design where you have to traverse a spiraling tree route up this dilapidated building. It's kind of like the Erd Tree routes at various points throughout Elden Ring. Fuck, I wish I was playing Shadow the Erd Tree right now instead of this shit. There's also a parallel world fight with two of the enemies with the previous boss's Phase 1 moveset, which is a ridiculous, embarrassing encounter. Nobody is completing this. Why the fuck would they? Let's just get back to the boss and end this. The boss is this wizard priest looking dude whose health bar is absolutely fucked. I min-maxed my damage as hard as I could in this run and ended up with a somewhat reasonable fight with this guy. However, without doing so, this would be such a boring, frustrating, broken slog. His moveset by no means necessitates the amount of health he has in the damage he deals, which is only meant to facilitate the difficulty quota expected from a Souls game. It is frustrating beyond measure to see copycat devs misunderstanding all the hard work that FromSoft has done over the years in an effort to create quality challenges as a boss with big health bar and high damage. It's fucking embarrassing. And that's not even taking into consideration that this boss is simply not working at times. But to understand that, I'll have to explain his moves a bit further. The main source of actual difficulty in mastering this dude's moveset comes down to two moves, which have very similar telegraphs but slightly different timings. That's all well and good, but there's far more coming into play than that. His two overhead delayed attacks seem very tricky to get the timing down at first glance, despite the fact that their timings are pretty similar, and therefore should have some overlap between them. If parrying, you'll find yourself missing the timing of the two-hit combo, which drops down and then slices back upwards after a delay. which will then cause you to course correct. However, you'll find that no matter what you do, your timings get worse and worse the more you try to properly hit them. After a while of experimentation, I came to the realization that my timings weren't the thing that was off. The move's hitbox is just broken. If you're too close to the boss, you know, the thing you have to do to damage him, his weapon's hitbox will hit behind your parry and deal damage to you on this move. It's pretty sad that the implied difficulty of this boss is not only built on his health bar being stupid large, but also having a broken move. I found myself having far more luck after realizing this and then backing away after every opening in hopes of making enough space to properly frame myself within the hitbox of the move. And I know half of y'all are watching thinking, oh, you couldn't beat the boss, so you had to lie and say its move was just broken. So I tested it by intentionally taking damage from an imperfect parry from close range and then from further away. Keep an eye on the damage I take from both attacks. When in close range, I take full damage from the move because it's hitting behind me, and therefore even a perfect parry timing would hit for full damage. When at a bit of range, the move does considerably less damage because it's appropriately hitting my imperfect parry block. And with fucking frustrates the shit out of me is that people are going to call this fight difficult and talk about how this demo is so hard, as though it's based on decent design, when in reality the fucking game isn't working right. I just wonder how many reviews are out there that actually notice this and have a real understanding of the fight at hand. I really fucking hope that this isn't the standard that will be set for the whole game, because we're in for an absolute ripoff if that's the case. I could really just end the video here. I mean, why should I go on if the boss isn't even functioning right? This wasn't a beta to test the functionality. It was a demo. It should be working properly. Anyway, let's just continue because there's even more criticism to be had. The first of which is the absolutely fucked up way that this dude's projectiles will track you perpetually, which means that you'll have to hit them within a dodge to avoid them. It's strange to canonically have to be hit by a spell to get rid of it. Like, the idea of a dodge is to give you iframes, but the implication is that you dodged under the attack or whatever. With this, you have to hit every projectile within your iframes or they'll persist and end up hitting you in one way or another. He has his jumpable move, which is the Phase 2 introduction move, which is pretty cool, but also in Phase 2 gets some more bullshit. He has a laser beam move, which visually doesn't seem to have the length to hit you if you're far away and just ends awkwardly. However, the damage hitbox does end up hitting you. Also, he has a weird blood spout move which completely blocks your visuals on the boss, potentially while he uses laser beam or other projectiles or the jump move. This led me to believe that you were supposed to be inside the spout circle when it activates, so that you're trapped, but you're also engaged with the boss. However, this is what I saw while I was in there. Yeah, this game has some pretty big issues with its visual effects. This kind of camera being obscured by something in the arena effect wasn't uncommon for me. There's also a big problem when it comes to lighting issues. There's no brightness bar in the settings, and so when the area behind the boss is dark, it becomes really hard to read their telegraph when their weapon is blending in with the darkness. This final fight was really boring, frustrating, broken, and uninspired, looking just like any other basic occultist crap in Lords of the Fallen. One thing I found was really powerful against him was the Harmonia Sap consumable, which gives you health on hits. This meant that I could trade blows with him and clutch up the final bit of the fight. Other than that, the rest of the consumables in the game seem really underwhelming, just giving you some stamina back on hits or making you resistant to status effects or something, but I wouldn't ever want to really rely on them. Even the Harmonia Sap, which is very powerful and will probably help you beat the fight with ease, I would only ever use near the end, because crutching on them and then running out would probably massively screw you over if they're not farmable. Yeah, this game looks really rough around the edges. As it stands, I don't plan on buying the full release unless I'm looking to make a Rage video in September, and I definitely reserve full judgment until then, so all I can say for now is, this fucking demo sucks cock. Thanks for watching.